There's a sense of deja vu as another terrorist attack has been carried out in Baluchistan province in Pakistan on the Shia-Hazara minority. The Islamic State has once again claimed responsibility for it. This is not the first time that the Shia-Hazara community has been targeted in Pakistan, nor is it the first time that the Islamic State has accepted responsibility for the attack. However, there is a consistent pattern we see from the Pakistani government side that in order to deflect attention from the actual problem, the government is, as usual, blaming external forces, whereas the community internally does not buy the government's stance, the government's version of what actually happened, because the government keeps saying that unidentified terrorists were behind the attack, whereas the Hazara community keeps saying that they know who these attackers are, and the government, the security establishment keeps providing them protection, which is why they keep carrying out these attacks with absolute impunity. Now, it's worth mentioning that these terrorist groups have also been targeting the police force and the security forces as well. In spite of all these, the government has not been serious in terms of pursuing these terrorists. With the passage of time, we see that these sectarian groups are rapidly expanding their network in Baluchistan. In the past, their operations were predominantly confined to Quetta. Now we see they're operating in other areas like Mastung in Mach, and also there is a tremendous presence of these anti-Shia groups in Makran region in Baluchistan, which shares borders with Iran. So if the government does not check this mounting trend of sectarian violence, this is going to get out of control. There is a consistent pattern that the government condemns an attack, makes promises that terrorists involved in these attacks would be brought to justice. But then we see no action taken, and another attack targets the vulnerable Shia-Hazara community again. It's very important for the government of Pakistan to make sure that not only these networks are dismantled, but they also have sufficient intelligence, sufficient information about the presence of these networks elsewhere in the province. These groups are no longer present in Quetta alone. They have a significant presence in different parts of the province, which means they are capable of dismantling the government's security apparatus at any time. They can easily breach the security plans the government has in place. And going forward, if the government does not move seriously, this is going to cause a lot of problems. Even if one is to believe the Pakistani government's version that it is external forces, it is the India-backed terrorists or the Afghan-backed terrorists carrying out these attacks, one thing we must not forget that it still is the government of Pakistan's responsibility to protect its citizens from the so-called foreign-backed terrorists. However, we see that the government has consistently failed in protecting the lives of Pakistani citizens. The citizens have taken all kinds of measures in order to convince their government by protests, by addressing press conferences, by raising the issue in the parliament. It's not as if that the government does not have the infrastructure to go after these terrorist groups. The government has substantially increased allocations for security forces, and the government has the capability. But it seems there is not enough will on the part of the government or enough courage on the part of the government to go after these groups, because these groups are can be very, very dangerous in terms of retaliating, in terms of carrying out attacks on the security forces, which is why the government feels it's very easy to blame foreign forces and to deflect attention from the Pakistani citizens. But in fact, that's not a long-term solution. Balochistan needs peace, and in order to bring peace in Balochistan, the government needs to have an overall long-term strategy, and right now we see that that strategy is missing. One example is that Prime Minister Imran Khan, soon after this incident, reacted saying that the Frontier Corps had been instructed to go forward, to take action, whatever is required. But let's step back. It's very important to understand that the Frontier Corps is not a law enforcement entity. It is not trained, it's not experienced, and it doesn't have the mandate to do the job of law enforcement. That is predominantly the job of the police force, of the levies force, and it clearly shows that there is either absolute disconnect from between different government entities, or the government authorities are absolutely oblivious of the fact that who has to take action, whose responsibility it is to enforce the law. Historically, we have seen that the Frontier Corps can offer a temporary relief, but it does not have the infrastructure, the training, the experience, and the mandate to serve as a law enforcement entity. It cannot replace the police. Going forward, the long-term solution would be to strengthen law enforcement entities such as the police, such as the intelligence community within the police service. The long-term solution would be to advance the capabilities of the police force, of the levies force, so that they do not rely on ad hoc solutions. The Frontier Corps can be a temporary solution, but it's not a long-term solution to the whole problem. It's very important that the police force are given the resources and the capabilities that they require in terms of being able to assess the plans of these networks and to go after these networks. We hope that the situation in Baluchistan does not get worse in 2021. However, if you look at the Pakistan security report by the Pakistan Institute for Peace based in Islamabad, it seems that Baluchistan was the second worst province after the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province in year 2020 in terms of the number of terrorist attacks, in terms of the number of people who were killed, and the number of people who have been injured. So this is going to be a challenging year for the government of Baluchistan. This attack in the first place is not a good sign, because if we step back and see the overall situation in Baluchistan, we know that Baluchistan is the epicenter of three kinds of violent attacks. The Baluch nationalists keep carrying out attacks. The Taliban have been targeting government installations and civilians off and on. And now we see that the Islamic State is no longer shying about accepting its presence and claiming responsibility. We hope that the government of Baluchistan would put all the resources that it needs to go after these sectarian groups and refrain from blaming external forces. It is the government's responsibility to make sure that the Hazara and the Shia members of the society are protected as much as every other citizen. But we feel that the Baluchistan government has historically betrayed the trust of the Hazara community. They've been promised time and again, but when it came to taking practical measures, the government failed time and again.